I'm Nancy Howard, and I was sitting in my kitchen with my second cup of morning coffee when I saw the photo. It popped up right at the top of my feed. Jean, my daughter-in-law, had posted it with one of those bright, breezy captions. Howard family reunion this July in Cape May. So blessed. Can't wait to make memories that matter. There they all were. My son Sylvester, his wife Jean, their two kids Tori and Caleb, and a bunch of relatives I hadn't seen in years. The whole crew standing in front of a house with light gray shingles and white trim. My house. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me know in the comments below. I leaned in a little closer to the screen, but I didn't need to squint. I recognized that porch swing. I picked it out at a flea market with my late friend Mia. I remember the chipped paint, the way it creaks a little when you sit down too fast. That swing is one of 100 tiny pieces of that house that I know like the back of my hand. They'd rented my beach house, and they didn't even know it. I sat back in my chair, quiet. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly I just felt empty. This would be the third year in a row they'd planned something and not told me. They used to at least make excuses. Sylvester would say it was just a getaway for the kids or a short notice thing. But after the second time, I stopped asking. Now, they weren't even pretending. I stared at the screen, looking at Jean's grin, Sylvester's sunglasses perched on his head, the kids in matching shirts. They looked like a picture-perfect family. Not a single hint that someone was missing. That someone was me. I scrolled through the comments. All the usual stuff. Beautiful family. Wish we could be there. What a gorgeous house. Someone even said, that place looks like something out of a magazine. It was. 2 years ago, Coastal Living ran a piece on Cape May summer rentals, and my house was featured. But of course, none of them would have seen it. I don't think Sylvester's picked up a magazine in years unless it had something to do with property flipping. I closed the laptop. I got up, walked to the back door, and stepped outside. The breeze was light, but it carried that salty smell I never get tired of. I could hear the waves if I listened carefully. My small cottage sits just a few blocks away from the shore. I don't need much these days, just quiet. But my mind kept going back to the photo, the caption, the choice. I wasn't even worth a phone call. I thought about canceling their reservation. My property manager, Carla, handled all the bookings through a service. They'd have no idea I was the owner unless I told them. It was set up that way on purpose. I never wanted attention or drama, but this felt different. It wasn't just the exclusion. It was the fact that they were standing on my porch, smiling wide, while pretending I didn't exist. Sylvester was my only child. I raised him mostly on my own after Howard, my husband, passed when Sylvester was 17. He was a good student, smart, ambitious. I worked 2 jobs to help get him through college. He used to call me every Sunday, used to tell me I was his anchor. And then, somewhere along the way, I became a burden. I remember the shift. It started small. Jean made comments about me needing extra help or how it wasn't safe for me to live alone. Sylvester suggested I sell the old family home. He said he could invest the money for me, get me into a nice assisted place. Said it like he was doing me a favor. When I hesitated, he got frustrated, told me I was being stubborn, told me I wasn't thinking clearly. And when I said no, when I told him I wanted to live my life on my terms, he stopped calling. And now here they were, renting my house for their family reunion. I walked back inside. My first thought was to call Carla and have her cancel the reservation. Just tell her the truth. That was my son. That was my family. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Jean had smiled so big, so sure of herself. Or maybe it was the silence of 3 years building up in my chest. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to confront. But I wasn't going to hide either. So I picked up the phone. Called Carla. "Hi, Nancy." She answered, chipper, as always. "I just saw who booked the house for July." I said, "Don't cancel it." "Oh, okay," she said slowly. "Do you want me to block it off for you instead?" "No," I replied. "Let them stay." Another pause. "All right. Anything I should know?" I looked out the window again. The wind had picked up. "Just let me know the day they arrive." "Will do." I hung up the phone, and I sat down at the table, folded my hands, and took a long breath. They didn't want me there. They didn't think I mattered. But next month, I'd be standing right there on that porch. Let's see how they look me in the eye when they realize the house they're renting belongs to the woman they left behind. Have you ever been left out of something by your own family without explanation? If so, how did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. After my husband passed, life got quiet. Howard had been gone nearly 5 years now. He was the steady one. Never flashy, never loud. Worked for the transit authority for over 30 years. Didn't believe in debt. He wore the same watch his entire adult life. And the only car we ever owned was a used Ford he fixed himself on weekends. When he passed, there wasn't a fortune left behind, but there was enough. Between his small pension and my Social Security, I could cover the basics. I kept the townhouse for a while, but the upkeep got to be too much. It wasn't just the money, it was the loneliness in the halls, the empty chair at the dinner table, the silence where his radio used to hum every morning. So I sold it. I moved into a small place near the coast. Cape May had always been a dream of mine. We'd visited once, just for a weekend. I remember telling Howard, if we ever retire near water, let it be here. He'd smiled, squeezed my hand, and said, "One day." I found a quiet little cottage 2 streets from the shore, just big enough for me and my things. The kind of place where neighbors wave when they see you and nobody's in a rush to be anywhere. I started volunteering at the community center just to keep busy. That's where I met Mia Benton. Mia was a retired architect, tough as nails, sharp as a tack. She was in her early 80s when we met, with short gray hair and the kind of posture that made you sit up straighter. She had no children, never married. She'd spent her younger years designing cottages and beach homes all over the Jersey coast. She came into the center asking if anyone could help her go through old blueprints. Said she wanted to organize them before her eyes gave out completely. I offered. We hit it off right away. Twice a week, I'd walk over to her big yellow house near the dunes. We'd sit at her kitchen table and go through her files. She had stacks of old photos, design sketches, even faded receipts from builds in the 70s. She told me stories about stubborn clients, broken permits, and how she once redesigned an entire house because a couple couldn't agree on which way the kitchen should face. I listened. She talked. Eventually, she trusted me enough to help her manage her small group of rental cottages. Nothing fancy. 3 modest homes she'd held onto over the years. I'd check them between guests, make sure the keys were set, leave fresh towels. She paid me a little, but that wasn't why I did it. I liked having somewhere to go, something to do. One of the houses was different from the others. Set back a bit, more private. Gray shingles, wraparound porch, those old wooden steps that always creaked no matter how gently you stepped. Mia called it the beach house, even though it wasn't directly on the sand. But you could see the water from the upstairs bedroom. She hardly ever rented it. Said it reminded her of her younger years. Said it was her favorite. A few years into our friendship, Mia got sick. She didn't talk much about it, but I could tell. She moved slower, ate less, canceled our usual days. Then one week she asked me to drive her to the doctor's office. That's when I knew. I kept helping her. Grocery runs, cleaning, whatever she needed. One afternoon, a few months before she passed, she looked at me and said, "Nancy, I don't have much time left, and I don't want these old places falling into the hands of people who don't care." I just listened. She continued, "You've taken care of this place better than anyone I ever hired. And more than that, you've cared about it." I didn't know what to say. When she passed, the funeral was small. A couple of neighbors, one cousin from up north. I brought flowers. About 3 weeks later, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as her attorney. Said Mia had left something for me. I assumed it would be a small check, maybe a piece of furniture. But when I sat across from him at that long oak desk, he slid a folder toward me. It was the deed to the beach house. "She left it to you," he said, "along with a maintenance fund, 5 years of coverage, enough to keep the taxes paid and cover basic upkeep." I was stunned. She wrote here that she trusted you to make it useful. He pointed to the letter she'd left with it. I remember the words like scripture. "This house has always been a place of rest for me. I hope it can be one for you too, or whatever else you need it to be." I cried that night, not out of sadness, but because someone thought enough of me to leave something behind. I had no intention of living there full time. It was too big for just me, and I'd grown fond of my quiet cottage. So, after a few months of thinking and praying on it, I listed it as a seasonal rental. Carefully, not to just anyone. I partnered with a local agency that worked with families looking for quiet vacations, not parties or weekend bashes. The first summer, it stayed booked the entire season. The income helped me cover my bills and allowed me to finally repair the back porch at my own place. I kept Mia's style, didn't gut it or change its bones, just polished what was already there, put fresh coats of paint on the shutters, added blackout curtains in the upstairs bedrooms, updated the kitchen appliances just enough to make them usable, and for the first time in a long while, I felt stable, independent. It wasn't just a house. It was a way for me to live on my own terms. And that's how I came to own the beach house, the same one my son had now rented without knowing it belonged to the mother he hadn't spoken to in 3 years. People don't just stop talking overnight. It starts with small things. Missed calls, excuses, awkward silences. Then before you know it, a week turns into a month, and a year goes by without a single word. That's how it was with me and Sylvester. After Howard died, things changed between us. At first, Sylvester was around more than I expected. He'd stop by after work, bring groceries, help me carry the heavier stuff. I was thankful. I thought we were growing closer. I thought he understood I was grieving, not helpless. But slowly, those visits started to come with suggestions. "Mom, that old house is just too much for you. Don't you think it's time to downsize? Why are you still mowing the lawn yourself? You need to be somewhere with staff." At first, I laughed it off. I told him I was managing fine. I was. The house held memories. I wasn't ready to let them go yet. I still pictured Howard sitting in his recliner, reading the paper. I could still hear his hum in the hallway some mornings. The house made me feel less alone. Sylvester didn't see it that way. He said I was being sentimental, said I needed to think practically. He brought brochures, assisted living facilities with bright pictures and smiling nurses. He talked like it was a done deal. Jean was no better. She had this habit of talking about me while I was right there. She leaves the stove on. That's not safe. She forgets things all the time. She's just lonely, Sil. She doesn't know what to do with herself. It got under my skin, how she'd say things as if I couldn't hear her, or worse, didn't matter. She once said I was slipping, I remember that word. Slipping. I wasn't slipping. I was surviving. Then came the real turning point. Sylvester asked me to co-sign something. A business deal, some kind of property flip in Philadelphia. He was trying to build his own development company, but he didn't have the credit or the capital to get the deal through on his own. He sat me down, brought the papers, said it was a sure thing, said I'd make my money back threefold, said it was safe. But I'd been around long enough to know when someone was rushing a decision. And he was rushing. I told him I needed time to look at it, maybe get someone to go over the documents. He didn't like that. You don't trust me? It's not about trust, Sylvester. It's about understanding what I'm signing. Jean chimed in from the kitchen. You're either helping or you're not. Don't drag it out. That night was the last time we sat at the same table. I told him I couldn't co-sign. I didn't feel comfortable risking everything Howard and I had built. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. It hurt to say no to my son. But I knew if I said yes and something went wrong, I wouldn't just lose money, I'd lose peace. He stood up, hands on his hips, said I was being selfish, said after everything he'd done, this was how I repaid him. Jean didn't even hide her disgust. She called me an anchor, said they had kids to think about, said elderly people who refused help became dead weight. I remember sitting there, looking at my son, wondering how we got here. Then he said something I'll never forget. You've made your choice. Don't expect to be part of our lives moving forward. He didn't yell. He didn't slam the door. He just picked up his coat and left. And that was it. I waited a few days, thinking maybe he'd cool off and call. He didn't. I left one message. He never returned it. The birthdays came and went. Christmas. I sent cards. Never heard back. When I found out Tori had a dance recital, I sent flowers. No thank you. Not even a text. I watched from a distance. Jean posted pictures of school awards, vacations, family barbecues. My name never came up. Not even a mention in passing. I told myself I wouldn't beg. That was the promise I made to myself. I'd leave the door open, but I wouldn't crawl to be let back in. The hardest part was the quiet. It's a strange thing when the people you love most treat you like you're invisible. I went from being mom and grandma to nothing at all. Rachel, my friend from church, once asked if I was angry. I told her no, not angry, just tired. Tired of hoping for a call that never came. Tired of pretending it didn't hurt, but I kept going. I baked bread on Sundays. I started volunteering more. I planted flowers in front of my little cottage. I learned to live with the ache. I didn't talk bad about them to anyone. I didn't write some letter telling them off. I just stepped back, with my head held high and my heart in pieces. And now, years later, they were smiling on the porch of my beach house, planning their big family reunion without so much as a second thought. I looked at that photo one more time. I wasn't part of their picture, but that house, the one they thought was just a rental, it told a different story. Because while they were building a world that didn't include me, I was quietly building something of my own. And they were about to find out. Have you ever been told something so hurtful that it changed everything? Did you choose silence like Nancy, or speak up? Share your experience below, and don't forget to subscribe. Carla called the morning they checked in. They've arrived, she said. Everything went smoothly. They're already unloading groceries. I thanked her and hung up. I walked over to my front window and looked out toward the shore. The sky was a soft blue, the kind that only comes early in the season before the humidity settles in. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down with the small tablet I used to check the property cameras. They're simple, only pointing toward the exterior areas, the front porch, the driveway, the back patio. just enough to keep an eye on things when I'm away. I tapped into the feed. There they were. Sylvester was lugging a cooler out of the back of the SUV. Jean was walking up the steps in a flowy sundress, barking instructions while holding her phone. The kids, Tori and Caleb, ran toward the backyard, laughing and chasing each other around the stone path I'd helped Mia lay 10 years ago. It was strange seeing them there, on ground that had nothing to do with them, acting like it belonged to them. Jean unlocked the front door with the code Carla had sent and walked in without hesitation, as if she'd been there before. I could only imagine what she thought when she saw the place. It's not flashy, but it's clean, solid, full of quiet charm. The furniture is well kept, the rugs clean, the kitchen stocked. I'd taken my time over the years to make sure everything stayed in good shape. A few hours later, I checked again. Jean was already moving things around. She'd taken down the bowl of dried lavender I keep on the foyer table and replaced it with a dish of potpourri from her bag. One of my pillows was folded and stuffed into a closet. The kids' shoes were lined up by the staircase. She found the photo on the bookshelf in the reading nook. It's an old one. Me and Mia on the porch swing, holding lemonade. I'd framed it in a simple wooden frame, nothing fancy. I saw her pick it up, stare for a moment, then slip it into one of the drawers in the hallway console. Not thrown away, but hidden. That told me everything. Later that evening, Sylvester grilled on the back patio. The security camera picked up his voice as he stood over the food, talking to someone off camera. $1,500 for the week, he said. For this location, it's a steal. Honestly, I don't know how we got so lucky. He laughed, proud of himself. I just shook my head. He had no idea that the house belonged to the very woman he'd once told not to expect to be part of his life. I poured another cup of tea and sat in silence. I didn't feel angry, not even hurt, really, not anymore. What I felt was something else entirely, a strange sense of stillness, like I'd come full circle. I watched my son walk across my porch, heard the screen door creak shut behind him, watched my grandkids splash in the backyard, playing in the hose I'd fixed last summer. And I knew this wasn't about revenge. I wasn't going to show up to yell. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to show up to be seen. I wanted them to know whose house they were standing in, not out of pride, out of truth, because I had spent too many years being the quiet one, the one who stepped aside, the one who made space for other people's comfort. But this time, I wouldn't make myself smaller. This was my house, my life, and I wasn't going to hide from it. I planned it out simple. I knew they'd be having lunch on the second day. Carla had arranged for a local caterer to drop off some platters. Jean liked things to look effortless, even when they weren't. I picked out an outfit that morning. A clean blouse, soft cotton pants, sensible sandals. Nothing too dressy, nothing showy, just me. I looked at myself in the mirror before I left. 68 years old, lines around the eyes, hair thinner than it used to be. But I saw strength there. I wasn't coming to fight. I was coming to stand in my own story. When I pulled into the neighborhood, I parked just down the block, walked the rest of the way. I took my time coming up the sidewalk. I could hear the chatter on the back deck, the clink of silverware. I stepped onto the porch, my porch, and I reached for the handle of the door that I knew better than anyone else in that house. The second evening came, just as I knew it would. The house was alive with noise, voices carrying through the open windows, chairs scraping across the deck, silverware tapping on plates. I waited until I heard the clinking settle into conversation. Then I walked around the side of the house, past the garden beds I'd helped Mia plant long ago. The scent of rosemary and old pine hung in the warm air. I took the steps slowly, steadying myself with the railing. Through the glass doors, I saw them. The whole family gathered around the outdoor table. Jean had gone for one of those setups with white dishes, little cloth napkins, and a pitcher of lemon water. She always liked things to look polished. Sylvester sat at the head of the table. Of course, he was talking, animated, probably telling some story he'd told a dozen times. His hands moved while he spoke. The kids were picking at their food, not paying much attention. I paused just outside the sliding glass door, took one breath in, then another, and I knocked. 3 soft taps. Nothing dramatic. The room stilled. Jean turned first. I saw her freeze, then blink as if her eyes were playing tricks on her. Then Sylvester looked. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His color drained so fast. I half thought he might faint. Tori whispered something to Caleb. Both children turned and stared at me like I'd stepped out of a dream they'd never been told. I slid the door open gently. "Evening," I said, as natural as if I were stopping by with a dish of cornbread. "I hope you're all enjoying your stay." I stepped onto the deck. Jean stood up. Her napkin dropped to the floor. What are you doing here?" she asked. I looked at her, then at Sylvester, and said, calm and steady, "Welcome to my home." For a moment, nobody moved. Jean's hand was still half raised, like she'd been about to reach for her glass. Sylvester's eyes were locked on mine, wide, unsure. The children looked to their parents, then back at me. This house," Sylvester stammered. "We rented this place. From an agency. We paid." "Yes," I said, nodding. "You did. I own it." You could hear the fork drop. Literally. The silence felt thick, not tense. Exactly, just heavy with realization. Tori was the first to speak. "Dad, you didn't tell us Grandma was coming." Jean looked like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. "She's not," Jean started, then stopped herself. I didn't speak again. I just stood still. Jean sat down slowly, as if unsure her knees would hold. Sylvester cleared his throat. "This is your house." I nodded once. "Yes, it's been mine for a few years now." "But how?" he asked, blinking hard. "I don't understand." "That's a longer story," I replied. "One I'd be happy to share, if anyone's actually interested." No one spoke, so I turned my attention to the children. "Tori, Caleb," I said gently, "it's good to see you again. You've grown." Tori gave a small smile. Caleb just stared. I looked around the table. They had served grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and something that looked like couscous. The table was set neatly with a little arrangement of wildflowers in the center, cut from my side garden. "I won't interrupt your dinner," I said after a moment. "I just thought it was time you knew whose house you were staying in." I turned to go, but then heard Sylvester's voice behind me. "Wait," he said. "Don't go." I paused, but didn't turn around just yet. Jean looked from him to me, then down at her plate. She didn't speak. I slowly turned back. "Sit with us," Sylvester said, his voice quieter now. "Please." I hesitated. It would have been easier to leave, to walk back down the steps, head back to my own cottage, and let them sit in the discomfort they'd made for themselves. But I didn't come here to shame them. I came to be seen. So I stepped forward and pulled out the empty chair at the far end of the table. Nobody said much as I settled in. Jean kept her eyes on her food. The kids watched me carefully. Sylvester looked down, then back up again, still not sure how to begin. It's a beautiful house," he finally said. "Thank you," I replied. "I've taken care of it." Jean reached for her water glass with a shaking hand. "You could have just told us," she muttered. "I didn't even know you were coming," I answered. "Like the last 2 years." That stung her, I could tell, but I didn't say it with anger, just truth. Sylvester exhaled deeply. "I had no idea this was yours. The agency didn't say." "They weren't supposed to." I said, "Owners are kept anonymous by default. I preferred it that way." He nodded slowly. The kids went back to picking at their food, unsure of what to do with the sudden tension. We sat like that for a while, quiet, awkward, trying to act like this was normal. It wasn't, but it was real. Eventually, Tori looked up at me. "Is it true?" she asked softly. "This is really your house?" "Yes," I said, looking her in the eye. "I used to help take care of it. Now it's mine." "Cool," she said, smiling a little. "It's the nicest place we've ever stayed." Jean stiffened at that. Sylvester gave a weak laugh. "Well, she's not wrong." I glanced at the flowers in the center of the table, the same ones I planted last spring with my neighbor's granddaughter. This was my space, and for once, I wasn't on the outside looking in. I didn't say much else during dinner. I answered a few polite questions. I passed the bread basket. I let the moment speak for itself, because they could dress it up all they wanted, set the table just right, pick the right angle for their photos. But none of that could cover what mattered most. The house they'd chosen for their picture-perfect reunion, it belonged to the woman they'd left out of the picture. And now she was sitting at the table. If you were in Nancy's shoes, would you have walked away or done what she did? Be honest, what would you do if your family unknowingly stayed in your home? Let me know in the comments. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. The next morning, I showed up at the house just after 10. I'd promised Carla I'd do a walkthrough before the gardener came later that week. And since I was already part of the conversation now, I figured I might as well keep the peace and make it official. Jean answered the door. She didn't say hello, just stepped aside and let me in. No eye contact. I took that as progress. The kids were sitting on the living room floor with a board game. Tori looked up right away. "Grandma Nancy, want to play?" I hadn't heard her call me that in over 3 years. I smiled. "Maybe after lunch." "Promise?" she asked. "Promise," I said. They went back to their game, and I walked into the kitchen. Sylvester was already there, stirring something on the stove. Eggs and toast sat out on the table, along with a half-empty pot of coffee. "Morning," he said, not quite looking at me. "Morning," I replied. "Smells good." He nodded. Jean made the toast. "I'm on eggs." I poured myself a small cup of coffee and sat down. The tension was still there, but it was softer than the night before. Like everyone was just figuring out what came next. Jean busied herself rinsing fruit at the sink. Didn't say much. She moved like she didn't want to be seen or spoken to. I wasn't going to force it. The kids joined us a few minutes later, still chatty from their game. Caleb asked me how old I was. I told him the truth, and he blinked like he couldn't believe people actually lived that long. Tori asked if I still baked cookies like I used to. I said yes, though now I used less sugar. Jean barely touched her plate. After we finished eating, Sylvester started clearing the table. I helped, even though it was still my house. I didn't want to make it about that. Jean went upstairs, mumbling something about needing a shower. I let her go. Later that evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Sylvester asked if I wanted to sit outside. I agreed. The porch was quiet. The moon lit up the sand just enough to see the outline of the dunes. He handed me a glass of water and sat down on the step beside me. "I owe you an explanation," he said, staring straight ahead. "I didn't ask for one," I replied. "I know," he said, "but I want to tell you anyway." I stayed quiet. He took a breath. The reunion wasn't just for fun. I made it sound like it was all about family time, but really, it was a move, a strategic one. I looked at him. "Go on." "I invited everyone here because I've got a cousin, Carl. He's looking to invest in small developments. Jean thought if we pulled off something nice, Carl would get a taste for what we can do, maybe back a few of my projects. So I pitched this as a way to reconnect the family while also showing off. He paused. I didn't know it was your house. If I had, I wouldn't have picked it. Or maybe I still would have, but I would have done things differently. I took a sip of water. What are you really saying, Sylvester? He looked down. I'm saying we're not doing as well as it looks. The market's been rough. 2 of our flips sat too long. Jean's worried. I'm worried. But I didn't want anyone to know. Not Carl, not the rest of the family, not you. I nodded slowly. So you put on a show? Pretty much, he said, laughing under his breath. We planned every little detail to look like we had it together. Jean even brought those stupid napkin rings she found on clearance. She said, nothing cheap-looking, no mismatched plates. We were trying to look like we belonged here, like we had something worth investing in. I didn't say anything. He didn't need reassurance, and I wasn't going to lie just to make him feel better. After a moment, he added, and then you showed up, sitting there like you'd been carved from stone. Calm, collected, just sitting in the house I didn't even know you owned. He turned to me. You changed the whole picture, Mom. I spent years thinking you were barely getting by. I didn't imagine you living near the coast, let alone owning a place like this. I didn't advertise it. I said, no, he agreed. You didn't. But maybe I should have called anyway, checked in, asked how you were. I didn't respond to that either. Sometimes silence says more than words can. He leaned back on his hands. It's strange, isn't it? You spend your life thinking you've got the upper hand. Then one little truth unravels the whole story. I turned toward him. You didn't lose anything by not knowing what I had, but you lost a lot by not knowing who I was becoming. He nodded. You're right. We sat there for a long time, watching the sky turn darker. Eventually, he said, we've made a mess of things, haven't we? I took another sip. That's one way to look at it. And you're not going to fix it for me, are you? I looked at him directly. No, Sylvester, I'm not. That's your work to do. He looked down at his shoes and gave a small nod. Fair. The wind picked up a little, brushing through the porch screens. I wrapped my sweater a little tighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small in his presence. I didn't feel dismissed or talked over. I felt like I was standing on even ground. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. The power between us had shifted, and not because of money or a house, but because I finally let go of needing his approval. He could see me now, and maybe that was enough to start something new. The next morning was quiet. I came by a little later than usual, around 10:30. I didn't knock. I let myself in with the key I'd had all along. The house was mine, after all, even if I was only using the back entrance these days. Jean was sitting at the dining table alone, sipping coffee. She looked tired, not unwell, just worn down, like someone who hadn't slept through the night. She glanced up when she saw me. There's coffee, she said, without any warmth, but without her usual bite either. I nodded and poured myself a small cup. I didn't sit down yet. I wasn't trying to start a war, I said gently. Jean sighed, staring into her mug. I know. I waited. After a moment, she spoke again. You have this way about you. Like nothing shakes you. It used to drive me crazy. Still does, honestly. I stayed quiet. Whenever Sylvester would get overwhelmed, he'd say, you know, my mother would have handled this without complaining. Like that was the gold standard. And if I didn't match it, then I was just falling short. She finally looked at me. It got under my skin. I always felt like I was being compared to you, and I couldn't win. I sat down then. You're not me, Jean, and you don't have to be. Well, try telling him that, she muttered. We sat with that truth for a while. I never tried to compete with you. I said, my voice soft. But I did try to be steady for Sylvester and later for the kids. That wasn't to show you up. That was just me surviving. I know that now, she replied, looking down again. Back then, I didn't want to see it. I was too busy trying to prove myself. She took a sip of her coffee. I didn't know how to share space with you. You were always so composed, and I felt like I was always behind. I wasn't composed, I said. I was just quiet. There's a difference. She smiled a little. Not a big smile, but not fake either. You know, you're not what I expected. Most people aren't, I said. Later that day, Sylvester found me on the porch again. He looked worn too. You all right? I asked. He sat down next to me and let out a long breath. I'd been thinking a lot about Dad. I nodded. I didn't handle losing him well, he admitted. I thought I had to take his place, run things, make sure everything stayed together. But I wasn't ready, and I didn't want to look weak. You weren't weak, I said. You were grieving. He rubbed his face with his hands. I didn't know what to do with the sadness, so I turned it into control. I thought if I could just manage everything, your living arrangements, your money, the house, then nothing else would fall apart. And when I said no, I added, you thought I was making things harder. He nodded slowly. I did. I thought you were being stubborn, but I see now you were protecting your peace. I wish I'd seen it then. I looked out at the trees lining the property. You don't get to undo it. That's not how life works. But you can learn from it. He turned toward me. Do you hate me? No, I said, but I had to stop chasing your approval to keep my peace. That came with distance. I didn't mean to push you away, he said, but you did. He nodded again. I'm sorry. I leaned back. I'm not here to fix your choices, but I won't disappear to make you comfortable either. He was quiet for a long while. Then he said, can we try again? Yes, I said, but on new terms. We didn't shake hands or hug or cry. We just sat there in the stillness of the late afternoon, letting that truth settle. A few hours later, the kids came outside with popsicles. Tori plopped down next to me. Grandma, do you still have that brownie recipe? The one with the marshmallows? I do, I said. I keep it in my old recipe box. Handwritten, stained, and still the best. Can we make them tomorrow? She asked. Only if you do the stirring, I replied. She grinned. Deal. Caleb stood by the porch railing, looking out. Is this your house all the time? Yes, I said. It's been mine for a while. Why didn't Dad tell us? He asked. Because sometimes grown-ups don't know how to tell the whole story. I said honestly. But that doesn't mean you can't ask. He nodded, still looking out toward the horizon. It's a nice house. Thank you, I said. It's more than a house to me. It's peace. Tori looked over at me. Will you come to our school play next month? I was surprised. I'd love to, even if Dad forgets to invite you, she asked. I smiled, especially then. That night, when I walked back to my cottage, I felt different, lighter, not fixed, not healed, but seen. And that was more than I expected. We weren't the same family we used to be, but maybe we didn't have to be. Maybe we could start from where we were, not pretending the past didn't happen, but building something new on firmer ground. On the last morning of their stay, the house was quieter than it had been all week. The suitcases were packed. Jean was folding towels at the kitchen counter. The kids were still in their pajamas, curled up on the couch watching cartoons. Sylvester stood out on the porch, sipping coffee, lost in thought. I arrived with a small paper bag in my hand. Inside were 2 disposable cameras. One blue, one green. Nothing fancy, just the kind you use to find near the checkout at drugstores. I handed them to the kids without a word. Tori's eyes lit up. What are these? Cameras, I said, like the ones I gave your dad, when he was your age. Caleb shook his. How do you see the pictures? You don't. I smiled. Not right away. You take the pictures now, and you wait. You get them developed, and see what turns out later. It's part of the fun. That's so old school, Tori said, but she was already winding the wheel and pointing it toward the window. Jean watched from the sink. She didn't say much, but when I caught her eye, she gave a small nod. I returned it. That was enough. When it came time to go, everyone shuffled around, checking for forgotten chargers and grabbing leftover snacks. The goodbyes were slow and scattered. Jean approached me first. She looked tired, but softer. Her tone was quiet. Thank you for letting us stay. I know this week wasn't what anyone expected. No, it wasn't, I said, meeting her eyes. But maybe that's not a bad thing. She hesitated, then leaned in and gave me a quick hug. It wasn't warm exactly, but it wasn't cold either. It felt like a step forward. The kids came running out next. Don't forget to send me your photos. I told them. Tori beamed. We will. I already took like 15. Caleb took 5 of the dog. I laughed. That sounds about right. They each gave me a hug. Caleb quick, Tori a little longer. Then Sylvester stood in front of me. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me for a few seconds, like he was still searching for the right words. I should have never pushed you out, he said finally, barely above a whisper. That was never fair. I nodded. I'm still here, Sylvester, but on my terms. His eyes dropped. Understood. He reached out for a hug, and I let him. It wasn't tight or emotional. It was steady, and that was enough for now. They packed up the car. I stood on the porch and waved as they pulled away. I watched the car turn the corner, then disappear down the street. The house was still again. The silence didn't feel heavy this time. It felt earned. Later that afternoon, I walked through each room, just making sure things were in order. The cushions were back in place, the extra towels in the laundry basket. Jean had even left a note by the coffee pot. Thank you for everything. I folded the note and tucked it into the back of my recipe box. Weeks passed. The air got cooler. Summer was giving way to fall. I went back to my usual routine, early walks, baking on Sundays, helping at the library 2 days a week. Then one morning, a letter arrived. Not a bill, not junk, a real letter. It was from Tori. The envelope had little star stickers on the back. Inside was a single page, written in neat, careful handwriting. Dear Grandma Nancy, thank you for the camera. My pictures came out so good. There's one of the waves at sunset that I really love. Can you teach me how to photograph the ocean like you do? Maybe next time we visit? Love, Tori. I held the letter in my hands for a long while. Then I smiled. She didn't mention the past. She didn't ask why I hadn't been there for other summers. She was just reaching out. And this time, I was being invited in. It reminded me that legacy isn't just what we pass down in money or things. It's what we leave behind in how we show up, how we forgive, and how we hold firm. I didn't fix everything with my family. I didn't try to, but I made a choice to show up, not to prove a point, but to be seen. And in doing so, I gave them the chance to see me again, not as someone waiting to be accepted, but as someone who already knew her worth. That's the life I'm building now, not one shaped by resentment, but by boundaries and quiet strength. And maybe that's how the next chapter begins, not with noise, but with an invitation. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to rebuild a relationship from scratch? Would you have opened the door the way I did, or walked away? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories about healing, boundaries, and second chances. Thank you for listening.